Hello, all, and welcome back to Tangents on Cracked Spines. If you're new here, I'm glad you're here. Maybe go back about 8 episodes to start this story from the beginning. As a quick intro, I'm Frankie, and we'll be reading with unedited personal commentary on the classics, or in reality, any story in the public domain. Listener discretion is advised, as some of the content holds adult themes and language. And I'm also known to use odd explicative, though I am trying to stop. We are currently reading the H.G. Wells' The Invisible Man. In the last episode, I was quite mad with the main character. He stole from his own father, which led to his father's untimely demise. And he experimented on his neighbor's cat. And then, in an attempt to keep himself from people from finding his experiments after he turned himself invisible, he set his apartment on fire. Which was then, the entire house. He is not an individual I like. The more the book goes on, the more I dislike him. A couple of pieces of information before we begin. I don't know whether I'll have more or less commentary, as this is my second time recording tonight. I am attempting to use my microphone for my computer instead of my phone, so we'll see how the audio changes. And in my infinite wisdom, I forgot to make sure that my microphone was not on mute. So I recorded for almost an hour muted, so there was nothing recorded. I also got sick from a friend. This is why I am normally a hermit. Socializing is bad. And that's been my thought process since before COVID times. This is nothing new for me. And now we'll begin. Again. Alright, chapter 21. In Oxford Street. In going downstairs the first time, I found an unexpected difficulty because I could not see my feet. Indeed, I stumbled twice, and there was an unaccustomed clumsiness in gripping the bolt. By not looking down, however, I managed to walk on the level passably well. Do people normally look at their feet when they walk? I mean, I guess to a certain extent, but... My mood, I say, was one of exultation. I felt as a seeing man might do, with padded feet and noiseless clothes in a city of the blind. I experienced a wild impulse to jest, to startle people, to clap men on the back, fling people's hats astray, and generally revel in my extraordinary advantage. That's fair. I mean, I feel like most people would go ahead and play some pranks if they found themselves invisible. But hardly had I emerged upon Great Portland Street, however, my lodging was close to the big draper's shop there, when I heard a clashing concussion and was hit violently behind, and turning saw a man carrying a basket of soda water siphons, and looking in amazement at his burden. Although the blow had really hurt me, I found something so irresistible in his astonishment that I laughed aloud. "The devil's in the basket," I said, and suddenly twisted it out of his hand. He let go incontinently, and I swung the whole weight into the air. But a fool of a cabman standing outside a public house made a sudden rush for this, and his extending fingers took me with excruciating violence under the ear. He's calling him a fool for, trying to be a decent human and help somebody with what is apparently a very large burden, when he's the one with tomfoolery. I let the whole down with a smash on the cabin, and then, with shouts and the clatter of feet about me, people coming out of shops, vehicles pulling up, I realized what I had done for myself, and cursing my folly, backed against a shop window and prepared to dodge out of the confusion. 1. He let this basket of whatever hurt a cabman. And second, instant karma, honey. It's about time you got some. In a moment, I should be wedged into a crowd and inevitably discovered. You would think that a crowd would be the best place for an invisible person. Who would pay attention to the fact that there's not actually somebody there that they're running into when there's a large amount of people? I pushed by a butcher boy who luckily did not turn to see the nothingness that shoved him aside and dodged behind the cabman's four-wheeler. I do not know how they settled the business. I hurried straight across the road, which was happily clear, and hardly heeding any way I went, in the fright of detection the incident had given me, plunged into the afternoon throng of Oxford Street. I tried to get into the stream of people, but they were too thick for me, and in a moment my heels were being trodden upon. That's what I would be worried about, is getting stepped upon. I took to the gutter, the roughness of which I found painful to my feet. That's fair. And forthwith, the shaft of a crawling hansom dug me forcibly under the shoulder blade, reminding me that I was already bruised severely. And maybe that you're invisible and therefore people are going to hit you because they don't know you're there. I staggered out of the way of the cab, avoided a perambulator by a convulsive movement, and found myself behind the hansom. A happy thought saved me, and as this drove slowly along, I followed in its immediate wake, trembling and astonished at the turn of my adventure. And not only trembling, but shivering. It was a bright day in January, and I was stark naked, and the thin slime of mud that covered the road was freezing. Stop going after my plants. What has gotten into you? Sorry, cats. Foolish as it seems to me now, I had not reckoned that, transparent or not, I was still amenable to the weather and all of its consequences. Or, otherwise known, I didn't think about the fact that to remain invisible I'd be stark naked. Then suddenly a bright idea came into my head. I ran round and got into the cab, and so shivering, scared, and sniffing with the first intimations of a cold, and with the bruises in the small of my back growing upon my attention, I drove slowly along Oxford Street and past Tottenham Court Road. My mood was as different from that in which I had sallied forth 10 minutes ago as it is possible to imagine. This invisibility, indeed. The one thought that possessed me was, how was I to get out of the scrape I was in? We crawled past Muddy's, and there a tall woman with 5 or 6 yellow-labeled books hailed my cab, and I sprang out just in time to escape her, shaving a railway van narrowly in my flight. Also, is no one paying attention to the fact that the hansom cab's doors are just opening and closing on their own? Or is the hansom cab the kind that's open and therefore doesn't have doors? I think I'm thinking of a carriage, not a cab. Whatever. I made off up the roadway to Bloomsbury Square, intending to strike north past the museum and so get into the quiet district. I was now cruelly chilled, and the strangeness of my situation so unnerved me that I whimpered as I ran. At the northward corner of the square, a little white dog ran out of the Pharmaceutical Society's offices and incontinently made for me, nose down. I had never realized it before, but the nose is to the mind of a dog, but the eye is to the mind of a seeing man. Dogs perceive the scent of a man moving as men perceive his vision. This brute began barking and leaping, showing, as it seemed to me, only too plainly that he was aware of me. I crossed Great Russell Street, glancing over my shoulder as I did so, and went some way along Montague Street before I realized what I was running towards. Then I became aware of a blare of music, and looking along the street saw a number of people advancing out of Russell Square, red shirts, and the banner of the Salvation Army to the fore. Well, I don't know about the Salvation Army back then, but I have plenty of reasons to not like them now. But either way, they're not the reasons you are disliking them. You're disliking them because a crowd means getting trampled. Such a crowd, chanting in the roadway and scoffing on the pavement, I could not hope to penetrate, and dreading to go back and further from home again, and deciding on the spur of the moment, I ran up the white steps of a house facing the museum railings, and stood there until the crowd should have passed. Happily, the dog stopped at the noise of the band too, hesitated, and turned tail, running back to Bloomsbury Square again. On came the band, bawling with unconscious irony some hymn about when shall we see his face. And it seemed an interminable time to me before the tide of the crowd washed along the pavement by me. I do like his choice of him. Thud, thud, thud came the drum with a vibrating resonance, and for the moment I did not notice two urchins stopping at the railings by me. "See 'em?" said one. "See what?" said the other. "Why, them footmarks, bare, like what you makes in mud." I looked down and saw the youngsters had stopped and were gaping at the muddy footmarks I had left behind me up the newly whitened steps. The passing people elbowed and jostled them, but their confounded intelligence was arrested. Thud, 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 when thud shall we see? Thud, his face, thud, thud. "There's a barefoot man going up them steps, or I don't know nothing," said one, "and he ain't never come down again, and his foot was a-bleedin'." The thick of the crowd had already passed. "Looky there, Ted," quoth the younger of the detectives, with a sharpness of surprise in his voice, and pointed straight to my feet. I looked down and saw at once the dim suggestion of their outline sketched in splashes of mud. For a moment I was paralyzed. "Why, that's the rum," said the elder. "Dashed rum, it's like a ghost of a foot, ain't it?" He hesitated and advanced with an outstretched hand. A man pulled up short to see what he was catching, and then a girl. In another moment he would have touched me. Then I saw what to do. I made a step. The boy startled back with an exclamation, and with a rapid movement I swung myself over into the portico of the next house. But the smaller boy was sharp-eyed enough to follow the movement, and before I was well down the stairs and upon the pavement, he had recovered from his momentary astonishment and was shouting out that the feet had gone over the wall. They rushed round and saw my new footmarks flash into being on the lower step and upon the pavement. "What's up?" asked someone. "Feet! Look! Feet! Running!" Everybody in the road, except my three pursuers, was pouring along after the Salvation Army. And this blow not only impeded me, but them. There was an eddy of surprise and interrogation. At the cost of bowling over one young fellow, I got through. And in another moment I was rushing headlong round the circuit of Russell Square, with 6 or 7 astonished people following my footmarks. There was no time for explanation, or else the whole host would have been after me. Twice I doubled round corners, Thrice I crossed the road and came back upon my tracks, and then, as my feet grew hot and dry, the damp impressions began to fade. At last I had a breathing space and rubbed my feet clean with my hands, and so got away altogether. The last I saw of the chase was a little group of a dozen people perhaps studying with infinite perplexity, a slowly drying footprint that had resulted from a puddle in Tavistock Square, a footprint as isolated and incomprehensible to them as Crusoe's solitary discovery. This running warmed me to a certain extent, and I went on with a better courage through the maze of less frequented roads that run hereabouts. My back had now become very stiff and sore. My tonsils were painful from the cabman's fingers. I don't think that's the correct anatomical part for, especially coming from someone who used to be a medical major. Tonsils are inside. I don't think he went in your mouth and grabbed your tonsils. And the skin of my neck had been scratched by his nails. My feet hurt exceedingly, and I was lame from a little cut on one foot. I saw in time a blind man approaching me and fled limping, for I feared his subtle intuitions. It's a little amusing that he would fear a blind man. Once or twice accidental collisions occurred, and I left people amazed, with unaccountable curses ringing in their ears. See, we don't have ghosts. There's just invisible people living in our way. Then came something silent and quiet against my face, and across the square fell a thin veil of slowly falling flakes of snow. I had caught a cold, and do as I would, I could not avoid an occasional sneeze. I mean, you are wearing your birthday suit in the middle of a January storm. Yeah, I would imagine you getting a cold. And every dog that came in sight, with its pointing nose and curious sniffing, was a terror to me. Then came men and boys running, first one and then others, and shouting as they ran. It was a fire. They ran in the direction of my lodging, and looking back down a street, I saw a mass of black smoke streaming up above the roofs and telephone wires. It was my lodging burning, my clothes, my apparatus, all my resources indeed, except my checkbook and the 3 volumes of memoranda that awaited me in Great Portland Street, were there. Burning! I had burnt my boats, if ever a man did. The place was blazing. Again, self-inflicted boon and instant karma. And what else did you expect to happen when you set a gas alight in your lodging? Were you just not thinking? Is that what this was? I mean, it doesn't seem like you do a whole lot of thinking. I shouldn't be surprised. But still. The invisible man paused and thought. Kemp glanced nervously out the window. Yes, he said. Go on. Chapter 22. In the Emporium. So last January, with the beginning of a snowstorm in the air about me, and if it settled on me, it would betray me, weary, cold, painful, inexpressibly wretched, and still but half convinced of my invisible quality, I began this new life to which I am committed. I love how he's more worried about being seen than anything else. Maybe if you weren't such an ass, you wouldn't have to worry about it. I had no refuge, no appliances, no human being in the world in whom I could confide. Because you're a terrible person and you don't think things through. You rage more than the Hulk. To have told my secret would have given me away, made a mere show and rarity of me. Nevertheless, I was half-minded to accost some passerby and throw myself upon his mercy. But I knew too clearly the terror and brutal cruelty my advances would evoke. I mean, a year later, look what you did, but apparently you weren't desperate enough at this time. I made no plans in the street. My sole object was to get shelter from the snow, get myself covered and warm, and then I might hope to plan. But even to me, an invisible man, the rows of London houses stood latched, barred, and bolted impregnably. That doesn't seem to be a problem for you after too long. Only one thing could I see clearly before me: the cold exposure and mystery of the snowstorm and the night. And then I had a brilliant idea. Light bulb moment. I turned down one of the roads leading from Gower Street to Tottenham Court and found myself outside Omnium's, the big establishment where everything is to be bought. You know the place: meat, grocery, linen, furniture, clothing, oil paintings even. A huge meandering collection of shops rather than a shop. I had thought I could find the doors open, but they were closed, and as I stood in the wide entrance, a carriage stopped outside and a man in uniform, you know the kind of personage with Omnium on his cap. I'm pronouncing that as best I can. It's spelled O-M-N-I-U-M. Omnium? I'm assuming it's the word. Flung open the door. I contrived to enter, and walking down the shop, it was a department where they were selling ribbons and gloves and stockings and that kind of thing, came to a more spacious region devoted to picnic baskets and wicker furniture. I did not feel safe there, however. People were going to and fro, and I prowled restlessly about until I came upon a huge section in an upper floor containing multitudes of bedsteads, and over these I clambered, and found a resting place at last among a huge pile of folded flock mattresses. He's so worried about being seen, but there are a couple of problems I have with this. One, he still has weight. Did none of these beddings show impressions of him walking upon them? But also, isn't he still dirty from the road? That would also leave a trace, I would think. The place was already lit up and agreeably warm, and I decided to remain where I was, keeping a cautious eye on the 2 or 3 sets of shopmen and customers who were meandering through the place until closing time came. Then I should be able, I thought, to rob the place for food and for clothing, and disguised prowl through it and examine its resources. Perhaps sleep or on some of the bedding. That seemed an acceptable plan. My idea was to procure clothing to make myself a muffled but acceptable figure, to get money, and then to recover my books and parcels where they awaited me. Take a lodging somewhere and elaborate plans for the complete realization of the advantages my invisibility gave me, as I still imagined, over my fellow men. If only y'all could see the faces I make. Closing time arrived quickly enough. It could not have been more than an hour after I took up my position on the mattresses before I noticed the blinds of the windows being drawn and customers being marched doorward. I wish we could march customers doorward. Retail places I've been, we just stare at them with an evil eye until they finally cash out and go away. And then a number of brisk young men began with remarkable alacrity to tidy up the goods that remained disturbed. I left my lair as the crowds diminished and prowled cautiously out into the less desolate parts of the shop. I was really surprised to observe how rapidly the young men and women whipped away the goods displayed for sale during the day. All the boxes of goods, the hanging fabrics, the festoons of lace, the boxes of sweets in the grocery section, the displays of this and that were being whipped down, folded up, slapped into tidy receptacles, and everything that could not be taken down and put away had sheets of some coarse stuff like sacking flung over them. Finally, all the chairs were turned up on the counters, leaving the floor clear. Directly each of these young people had done, he or she made promptly for the door with such an expression of animation as I have rarely observed in a shop assistant before. That's because you have never seen them being able to close up and go home. Because most people are ecstatic to be able to clock out. Then came a lot of youngsters scattering sawdust and carrying pails and brooms. I had to dodge to get out of the way, and as it was, my ankle got swung with the sawdust. Again, your fault for being in their area. You should have learned. For some time, wandering through the swathed and darkened apartments, I could hear the brooms at work. And at last, a good hour or more after the shop had been closed, came a noise of locking doors. Silence came upon the place, and I found myself wandering through the vast and intricate shops, galleries, showrooms of the place, alone. It was very still. In one place, I remember passing near one of the Tottenham Court Road entrances and listening to the tapping of boot heels of the passerbys. My first visit was to the place where I had seen stockings and gloves for sale. It was dark, and I had the devil of a hunt after matches, which I found at last in the drawer of the little cash desk. Why is my printer printing? My printer's haunted, y'all. No, apparently it was updating. Which I found at last in the drawer of the little cash desk. Then I had to get a candle. I had to tear down wrappings and ransack a number of boxes and drawers, but at last I managed to turn out what I sought. The box label called them lamb's wool pants and lamb's wool vests. Okay. So... Okay. Has zero problem just ruining the place. Then socks, a thick comforter, and then I went to the clothing place to get trousers, a lounge jacket, an overcoat, and a slouch hat, a clerical sort of hat with the brim turned down. I began to feel a human being again, and my next thought was food. Upstairs was a refreshment department, and there I got cold meat. There was coffee still in the urn, and I lit the gas and warmed it up again. And altogether, I did not do badly. At least he's not too picky about food. I know a lot of people who don't like cold coffee, cold or not. Afterwards, prowling through the place in search of blankets, I had to put up at last with a heap of down quilts. As though that's a terrible thing. Down quilts would be hella warm. I came upon a grocery section with a lot of chocolate and candied fruits. More than was good for me, indeed. And some white burgundy. And near that was a toy department, and I had a brilliant idea. Oh look, he actually has a light bulb go off. I found some artificial noses, dummy noses, you know, and I thought of dark spectacles. But Omniums had no optical department. My nose had been a difficulty indeed. I had thought of paint, but the discovery set my mind running on wigs and masks and the like. Finally, I went to sleep in a heap of down quilts, very warm and comfortable. My last thoughts before sleeping were the most agreeable I had had since the change. Well, yeah, the change was very painful and apparently destroyed half of your brain cells given the way you've been acting. I was in a state of physical serenity, and that was reflected in my mind. I thought that I should be able to slip out unobserved in the morning with my clothes upon me, muffling my face with a white wrapper I had taken, purchased with the money I had taken, spectacles and so forth, and so complete my disguise. I lapsed into disorderly dreams of all the fantastic things that had happened during the last few days. I saw the ugly little landlord vociferating in his rooms. I saw his two sons marveling, and the wrinkled old woman's gnarled face as she asked for her cat. I mean, you did still experiment on him, even if you didn't cut him up. I experienced again the strange sensation of seeing the cloth disappear, and so I came round to a windy hillside, and the sniffing old clergyman mumbling, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, at my father's open grave. You also, said a voice, and suddenly I was being forced towards the grave. I struggled, shouted, appealed to the mourners, but they continued stonily following the service. The old clergyman, too, never faltered, droning and sniffing through the ritual. I realized I was invisible and inaudible, that overwhelming forces had their grip on me. I struggled in vain. I was forced over the brink. The coffin rang hollow as I fell upon it, and the gravel came flying after me in spadefuls. Nobody heeded me. Nobody was aware of me. I made convulsive struggles and awoke. Aw, does some part of you have a conscience? The pale London dawn had come. The place was full of chilly gray light that filtered round the edges of the window blinds. I sat up, and for a time I could not think where this ample apartment, with its counters, its piles of rolled stuff, its heap of quilts and cushions, its iron pillars, might be. Then, as recollection came back to me, I heard voices in conversation. Then, far down the place, in the brighter light of some department which had already raised its blinds, I saw two men approaching. I scrambled to my feet, looking about me for some way of escape, and even as I did so, the sound of my movement made them aware of me. I suppose they saw merely a figure moving quietly and quickly away. "Who's that?" cried one, and "Stop there!" shouted the other. I dashed round a corner and came full tilt. A faceless figure, mind you, on a lanky lad of 15. He yelled, and I bowled him over, rushed past him, turned another corner, and by a happy inspiration threw myself behind a counter. In another moment, feet went running past, and I heard voices shouting, "All hands to the doors!" asking what was up, and giving one another advice on how to catch me. Lying on the ground, I felt scared out of my wits. But, odd as it may seem, it did not occur to me at the moment to take off my clothes as I should have done. I had made up my mind, I suppose, to get away in them, and that ruled me. And then down the vista of the counters came a bawling of, "Here he is!" I sprang to my feet, whipped a chair off the counter, and sent it whirling at the fool who had shouted. Turned, came into another round a corner, sent him spinning, and rushed up the stairs. He's such a terrible individual, and apparently always has been. And I'm sorry if there's some creaking as I play with the headset. I'm right next to the heater, so that's not helping this be any more comfortable. He kept his footing, gave a view hello, and came up the staircase hot after me. Up the staircase were piled a multitude of those bright-colored pot things. What are they? Art pots? Suggested Kemp. That's it, art pots. Well, I turned at the top step and swung round, plucked out of a pile, and smashed it on his silly head as he came at me. You're the one destroying and robbing. He's not the silly one. The whole pile of pots went headlong, and I heard shouting and footsteps running from all parts. I made a mad rush for the refreshment place, and there was a man in white, like a man cook, who took up the chase. Why do you have to specify man cook? He was dressed like a cook. I made one last desperate turn and found myself among lamps and ironmongery. I went behind the counter of this and waited for my cook, and as he bolted in at the head of the chase, I doubled him up with a lamp. Down he went, and I crouched down behind the counter and began whipping off my clothes as fast as I could. Coat, jacket, trousers, shoes were all right, but a lamb's wool vest fits a man like a skin. I heard more men coming. My cook was lying quiet on the other side of the counter, stunned or scared speechless, and I had to make another dash for it, like a rabbit hunted out of a woodpile. You deserve it. This way, policeman, I heard someone shouting. I found myself in my bedstead storeroom again, and at the end of a wilderness of wardrobes. I rushed among them, went flat, got rid of my vest after infinite wriggling, and stood a free man again, panting and scared as the policeman and 3 of the shopmen came round the corner. They made a rush for the vest and pants and collared the trousers. "He's dropping all his plunder," said one of the young men. "He must be here somewhere." But they did not find me all the same. I stood watching them hunt for me for a time and cursing my ill luck in losing the clothes. Maybe if you just hidden instead of trying to run away, you'd have been able to get away with the clothes when people actually opened. But you're not that smart. Then I went into the refreshment room, drank a little milk I found there, and sat down by the fire to consider my position. In a little while, 2 assistants came in and began to talk over the business very excitedly, and like the fools they were. I heard a magnified account of my depredations and other speculations as to my whereabouts. Then I felt scheming again. Of course you did, because that's who you are. The insurmountable difficulty of the place, especially now it was alarmed, was to get any plunder out of it. I went down into the warehouse to see if there was any chance of packing and addressing a parcel, but I could not understand the system of checking. Lucky you to have never had to work outside of a learned position. About 11 o'clock, the snow having thawed as it fell, and the day being finer and a little warmer than the previous one, I decided that the Emporium was hopeless and went out again, exasperated at my want of success, with only the vaguest plans of action in my mind. Well, my dear sir, that seems like the only kind of action plans you ever have. The vaguest kind. Anyways, that's where we'll end for today. Thank you all for listening. Now for some typical podcast business. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and rate and review or on whatever podcast app you're using. Although the algorithm seems to like Apple Podcasts best. While 5 stars is appreciated, other ratings, as long as they have reviews, tell me how I can improve. Sharing with your friends is also welcome. You can reach out to me at tocspod@gmail.com. That's the initials of this podcast. Phonetically, that's Tango Oscar Charlie Sierra Paris Oscar Delta @gmail.com. On Facebook at Tangents on Cracked Spines Book Club, or with a voice message at anchor.fm/Tangents on Cracked Spines. The Facebook page will have updates posted and polls to vote on the next story. If you're interested in merch, I made a few items for my personal Etsy shop, which I'll link in the bio. Thank you all again for listening. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully the audio is not too bad. Whichever is better is the one I'll use next time. Thank you.